Okay, good evening, everyone. Can you able to hear me, Sonal?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I think only less than 10 participants have joined the session. Let's wait for 1 more minute and then we can start the session. I think we can start the session today. So welcome you all. So today we are going to see a solve with instructor session. So that is based on flask login. And before going to the session, do you have any other doubts regarding week 9? If you have any doubts, we can clear that and then we can move on to the session. Okay. Okay, Sonal, can I start it? Otherwise, I have to wait for a few more minutes.
No, ma'am, we can start. I think we can start.
Okay. So I will start presenting my screen. And I have written some set of instructions. What are the things we are going to do in this session? And based on that instructions, we are going to do the flask login. And based on that flask login, we will render how the login and logout as well as the authentication is represented using flask login. So I will share the screen. Okay. Can you able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So this is the instructions that what we are going to do today based on solve with instructor session, right? So we are going to create a flask login, right? So what is flask login? So this flask login is mainly used to do session management for the users, right? For example, if a user logged into a particular application, until he logs out, the session will be starting from login up until logs out, the entire session will be managed, and that session management is done by this flask login, right? So the common task like logging in, logging out, as well as remembrance of the user session throughout the period of from login up to logout will be maintained by this login flask login. And based on that, we are going to see how to do this flask login using simple program, right? So the first step is we have to import the necessary packages, so we are going to implement the same using SQL Alchemy, and which is an ORM mapping between the database and your Flask application. And that package, whatever package that are needed. So for Flask, we have to import the Flask package, as well as for SQL Alchemy, we have to import that particular packages. Then we have to import the specific packages for login manager also to implement this Flask login in Python program, right? So the next one is to create Flask application object. So that and all, you know how to create a Flask application object, right? And after creating that Flask application, the next step is to set the URI for the database, universal resource identifier for the database. So that will represent where your database is available, and that URI will help you to make the connection between the application and then the database. And if you want to implement this Flask login, you have to set a unique secret key for that particular Flask login. Until that and that unique secret key, so why I have specified the word unique, because it should be unique and it should not be similar to any other secret key that is set in your application, right? So that is the meaning of it. And setting that secret key also, we need some criteria, it should consist of so many number of letters, and the length should be greater than, like that we will have, right? So this secret key is used mainly for login purpose. And if you are not implemented that secret key, obviously you will get a error that the secret key is not available for Flask login, right? So that is also important. After setting the URI for database, we have to set the unique secret key for that database. And then the next step is to create an object for the database. Just I will move the screen a little bit here. Yes. Right? So next is to create an object for the database. And while you are creating that object, you have to pass the Flask object that already you have created for this application, right? So that Flask object should be the argument for this database object. So next we have, so as I have said earlier, for importing necessary packages, login manager is one of the package you have to include it, right? So for that you have to create the object for login manager. And what are the main functionality of Flask login? It will maintain the login, logout, as well as the session through from login to up to logouts, right? So that session period also will be managed by this login manager. So for that, we are creating an object for that login manager. So next we have Flask object is passed. So this is the initialize app method, which is to initialize the login manager. To that login manager class, we are going to pass once again this Flask object, right? So this Flask object, what we have created, has to be passed as an argument for the database, as well as it should be passed as an argument to this init app method, which will initialize automatically when this method is invoked. And then next is to create user model. So this is based on your SQL alchemy. So you know how to create a model, right? So here in this example, I have created two column. One is for ID and another one is for name. And this is the table name for that particular model, right? So this is normally how you have implemented SQL alchemy, that will be available here, right? So create user model. And this user table consists of two columns. One is ID and another one is name. And these are the things we are going to see today in this today's solve with instructor session. How to log in, and if it is logged in, what message will be rendered in the browser. Similarly, if it is logged out, what message will be rendered in the browser. And excuse me. So if it is the current user, that is the active user, automatically it will also display the name of that active user. That will also return in the web browser, right? So these are the steps I am going to follow today for representing the Flask login example. So if you have any doubts in this instructions, you can ask me. Otherwise, we can directly move on to implementing this. Yes. So I think can you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay. Okay. If there is no doubt, means we will move on to the implementation part of Flask login. Okay. So I'm going to import the packages that are needed. So first I'm importing the Flask package, and then I'm importing SQL Alchemy. Okay. And then next I'm going to import the login manager, as I have said before in that instructions. So user mixin, for login manager, there are certain properties that are available. If you use this user mixin in this model representation, automatically it will derive all the properties of that login manager, right? So what are the properties that will be derived automatically if you use user mixin? I will just tell you. Is authenticated, is active, is anonymous, and get id, right? So I will so these are the properties that will be implemented automatically if you use this user mixin along with your database creation, right? So that table creation, class, user, that model creation, automatically if you pass this user mixin argument, automatically it will implement all these three properties. The what are the four properties? So not three, it's four properties. One is authenticated, another one is active, and is anonymous, and then get id, right? So while I am representing that user mixin in that model, I will represent what are the properties usage also, right? So we are importing user mixin also, and then login required. Login user, logout user, and then current user, right? So that's all about importing the packages. So next I'm going to create the Flask application object, app equal to Flask. And then next I'm going to create the URI for the database, app.config. So /login. So this is the file where I am storing that database, as well as that within the database, the table is also stored, right? So login dot SQLite. So URI is created. After that, I'm going to assign the secret key. configure the secret key. So secret key is very much important for Flask login. If you have not assigned that key, automatically it will show error while you are executing your program. So I have created the secret key. So next I'm going to create the object for SQL Alchemy. And I'm going to pass the object, Flask object. So next, login manager. I'm going to create the object for login manager. So object for login manager is also created. So next I'm going to initiate this login manager by passing this Flask login object to that. Sorry, Flask object to that. Login manager dot, I'm going to call that init method. Init and pass the Flask object. So now I'm going to create the model class user mixin db.model. So as I said before, user mixin will implement the properties is authenticated, is active, and is anonymous, as well as get ID, right? So I will tell you what are these properties will do. So while you are representing this is authenticated, automatically if it is returning true, that means the current user is an authenticated user, right? So here also by default, if you are using user mixin, is authenticated will return true. That specifies that uh, uh, whatever login details you have provided for that current user is authenticated, and that is also available in the database table. And then is active. So is active will also represent that the user is active, and so there are so many number of states that are available for the user. Suspended, like that. There are states that are available. So if it is active only, the session is active, right? So normally Flask login is to monitor the active session starting from the login and towards the logout period, right? So is active will specify that the current user is active and he is not suspended, like that and all, right? So he is active, he or she is active throughout the session. So that is the property of is active. And is anonymous, if so is active, if it is returning true means the current user is active in that particular session. And is anonymous, that specifies if it is returning true, the current user is an unauthorized user. That means he is not an authorized user, right? So if it is returning true, is anonymous, if it returns true, that specifies that the current user is an anonymous user. If it is returning false, actually it should return false if the current user, what user you are representing is a genuine user or an authenticated user, right? So here in for that third property is anonymous. Uh, that is for the user who is not authenticated, it will return true. If it is authenticated, it will return false. And the final fourth property that will be implemented using user mixin is get ID, get underscore ID. That property, what it will do, it will return a string that uniquely identify that particular user, right? So what user you are creating, for that user, it will, so for session management, there should be a unique identification for the session management when the user logs in until he logs out. So that unique identification is represented as get ID, which will return as a string value, right? So these are the four properties that will be implemented implicitly by using this user mixin, right? So that is the benefit of this user mixin argument, what you are passing here, and that also already we have imported in this package, right? So after, so now I'm going to define the class. So any doubt in this properties? I think any one student, can you please respond so that I can able to confirm that I'm going in a right path? Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. 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 Let's start with this class definition. So created a class named user, and then I'm going to create two column. One is ID db dot. So db object I db dot column db dot integer, sorry, comma primary key. So this ID column is represented as primary key. So primary key is true. Okay. So next column equal to db. So since it is name, we are representing as string value. And after that, so here I am going to create an initializer for the class. So in other language, we can represent this as a constructor, right? So that meaning is once the object for the class is created, automatically it will be invoked, right? So the initializer function self dot id. Okay. Right. So, so for these are the things I have represented. I have created two columns under the user table, and then I have created one initializer method. So this is the syntax for initializing. It is otherwise known as constructor. So how this method will be invoked once the object for the class user is created, automatically this will be invoked. No need to call that particular method. Right. So next I am going to represent login manager, the decorator. So login manager object dot user load. user loader. Okay. So what this it will do, it will load the current available user, that is authenticated user. So it reload the user object from the user ID stored in the session, right? So what user ID is stored in the session, from that user ID, it will load the user information, right? So that is the use of this user loader. Next. So within this, the function is first user. Return user query get. So this will get the ID of the user and it will load it. After loading it, I'm going to represent the endpoints at app.root slash. So if index so here I'm going to create the object for retrieving the query from the table equal to user dot query dot filter by. So specific name will be given here. So based on that name, it will retrieve from the table and that will be loaded in the browser, whether it is logged in or logged out or current user name equal to login user. Login user, that object you have to pass here. And then you have to return some message that the person has been logged in, right? So any message you can give here. So just I'm giving logged in. So next endpoint app.root for logout. And then the function for logout. Logout user. So these are the things already I have done in this package import itself, logout user, login user and all. So that automatically it is detecting logout user. And then return so next endpoint is to represent what is the name of the current user, app.route sorry, for each and every thing you have to, for each and every endpoint you have to represent login required also, right? So at similarly for logout, for this endpoint also you have to represent login required. And for this also you have to represent login required. Next, define the method. Current user is current user dot me. So after that, I'm going to represent. So since I have given this initializer here, right? So class initializer, so that I have to call that initializer by creating the database as well as creating a user within the table of table user, creating a new user under the table user. So for that, I'm writing another method or another function. DB. So otherwise you can create it in the shell that is in Replit. So whatever I'm doing is in the Replit. So you can either go to the shell and then you can type Python and do what are the things I am doing in this function. Otherwise you can do it in this function itself, right? In the program itself you can directly do. Otherwise you can do it in the shell prompt of Replit. So this will create the database as well as the table. And then new user equal to, so the table name already I have created is, for this is user. So I'm giving the same name here, user. And then I'm passing the ID as well as the name. So I'm just giving the ID is 112 and the name already I have verified that should be filtered by this, right, rows. So I'm giving the same name here. And then I'm adding this new user to the table, db dot session dot add new user, and then committing all the sessions. Dot commit. So this will automatically write into your table in the database and save the content, right? So this method is created and I'm going to call the function if name is equal to main. So to run the application, and then I'm going to call this method, right? So if you call this method, automatically this particular line will again invoke, it will create this ID and name, it will assign to this init method and it will be automatically assigned to the data table of that user, right? So I'm going to call this particular function init underscore, and then I'm going to run the app. Okay, so that's all. Right, so before running I have imported all the packages, created object for the flask, created the URI as well as created the secret key, and passed the flask object to the SQL alchemy, and then created object for login manager and initialized that login manager class. And after that I have created a model by passing user mixin, which will implement the 4 properties, and two column has been created, and this is the initializer for the class. This will be invoked automatically if the object is created, and here the object is created. So once this object is created, this will be invoked automatically, and that will be assigned to the user table, right? So ID will be 112 and name will be row. And after that, I have represented for login as well as for logout. For each login and logout, I have represented login required. Here also login required. And the final one, it will display the current username, and everything will be represented using this particular statement, right? So it will filter, it will generate a query and retrieve the particular name. So here only one row has been created for the table, that is 112 and row. So obviously that particular name will be retrieved and that will be displayed in the browser, right? So now I'm going to run this program. So it's implementing all the, importing all the packages. So meanwhile, if you have any doubts in this program, you can ask me until it executes. Yes, any doubts? So since only myself is talking, I cannot able to understand whether you can able to understand this last login or not. Anyone kindly confirm, any student?
Ma'am, in line number 10, the
Okay.
user mixin you have given in the attribute. Yeah.
Yes.
Ma'am, what is it doing? Can you again explain it, please?
Okay. So this user mixin will implement 4 properties of this login manager. So what are the 4 properties are? Is active, uh, is authenticated, and is anonymous, and get ID, right? If you are not using this, you can represent all the properties similar to this function definition, right? So you have to represent all the properties like this, and then you have to specify return true for that, right? So this user, so just a minute, I will show you by presenting. So let it execute. Until then, I will stop this, and then I will show you in that screen. Just 1 minute. Okay. Okay. So whiteboard is not available. Okay, I will present the paint and show it to you. Okay. So here I will represent what this user mixin represents. Okay. So first one is authenticate. Right. So if you are using this is authenticated method, so obviously if you are representing this, if you are not using user mixing, you have to define this method within that class. Define is authenticated, and then you have to represent return true. That means if the user is an authenticated user, so according to our case, Rose is the only one user that is there in the table. So this is the authenticated user. So this method should be there to check the login manager that that particular user is authenticated or not, right? So this is the one of the property that will be provided by user mixin, right? And another property is second property is def is active, right? And this also should return true. So can you able to see the screen? Yes, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So return true. So this also specifies that that particular session of that user should be active. So the session is active. That means he is currently accessing, he has logged into the application and he is doing some work within that login session. And still he is in active state. He has not logged out or he has not suspended in that particular session, right? So that should be also written true, so that Rose is an active user, right? So first one is authenticated and he is an active. He is not suspended or he is not logged out from that session, right? So that is the meaning of it. So the third property is anonymous, right? So this anonymous specifies that, so spelling okay. So this anonymous specifies that if it is written true, but actually it should return false. For defaultly it will return false, but if it is written true, that specifies that current user is an not authenticated user if it returns true, but defaultly it should return false. That means the current user is actually, according to our program, the current user is Rose and he is in an active state and he is authenticated. So it should return false, that it is, he is not an authenticate, sorry, she is not an, she is not an, sorry, she is an authenticated user, right? So if it is returning false only, it is authenticated. If it is returning true, it is not authenticated, and if it is returning false, it is authenticated. And the last method is get ID. Sorry, last property is get ID, right? So what this get ID will do, it will return the string of that unique identification of that session management, right? So for each and every person who have logged in, until he logs out, a unique ID will be represented for the session, particular session, and that ID will be represented as a string, as it will return the string ID, which is an unique for that corresponding user, right? So that will be returned by this um, property, right? So that properties and all represented as methods here, right? So you can specify this as methods or functions or a property. So why I am representing as property, this is one of four properties can be implemented directly if you are passing this user mixin. No need to specify within the class, right? So that is the use of user mixin. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah, ma'am, clear. And also, ma'am, that what is the difference between authentication and anonymous? I'm not getting actually. Can you
So
clarify, please?
authenticated means the person is authenticated. Uh, he is a valid person and he is entering so the login details, everything is valid and he is authenticated to access the particular session, right? So that is authenticated. So here, according to our case, Rose is the only one row we have created, and that person name is Rose. That person is authenticated to be there within that session. Anonymous, if anyone else trying to access that particular session, he should not able to access that session, right? So that's for that particular person, this particular property will be invoked, and if it is true, automatically he will be prohibited by entering into that particular login. So that is known as anonymous. If this is true, he is not eligible to log in. If this is true, he is authenticated to login and he can able to do what are the things that so once the login is created, you are authenticated to do anything within that login. But if you have not created login and if you are trying to access that particular application, this will be true and you will be prohibited to enter into that session. Clear?
Oh, clear, ma'am. Clear.
Yes.
Thanks.
So let's see whether the application is invoked now. Okay. So I will start sharing the screen. So it's showing some error. Import error. It's showing import error. So is there any error in flask_SQL icon? L is not capital, so that it's showing error. Okay. Again, it's showing error.
Ma'am,
Okay, okay.
Line.
Line number 7. Thank you, thank you. So whether the name that I have given is in the correct order. Something is correct only. Stop and run it 1 second. It's showing some error. You're right. The secret key, let me change that secret key. Filter by name is also correct. So this program already I have represented, but it is working fine. Let me show that particular program. I don't know why this is not showing exactly I have done like that. So it's working. I don't know what mistake I have done there. So if you are representing with slash, it's showing logged in. And if you are representing slash logout, so let me find out what mistake I have done there. Automatically it's showing logged out. And if I am representing the endpoint as home, it has to show the current user. Right. So here also, if I am refreshing more than one time, it's showing. If you are representing in a local machine, it will execute properly. Right. So I have not done any other modification. Just I have stopped it and opened it once again. So far it showed error, and after that it's showing the current user is root, right? So same thing I have represented. Let me check it out. What are the things I have left out there? Login is created. U1. I think I have not represented U1 there. Let me check there. That also represented even is there.
Hello,
Yes,
you have used a login required before logging in. That should not be
before
there.
logging.
Route slash app.route slash you have used login required. Before logging in, we don't need logging, right?
Before logging,
Number 20
log 20.
should be removed, right?
So before logging in, it should be, yes, yes, I think so. That is the issue. Yes, correct. So before logging in, login required is not needed. So I have included it so that only it's showing the error. So now the application is started. So if the route is only slash, it will display logged in. And if I have changed it into logout, it will display logged out. And if the endpoint is home, it has to display the current user. But if I refresh it, it will show.
And after logout, can we like I think after login you have to give home.
After login,
After logout, if you give home, I think that is why it is showing unauthorized.
oh, the previous one also I have done like that. But if I am closing this and opening, it will show. I think so.
Can I say something?
Yes, right. So it's showing.
Yeah, that's
See,
why
if
like
you see
after you
here,
log out,
up to this particular point, it's showing error, and after that, it's showing that it is showing correctly, right? So that is it. The updation is not done automatically, right? So here I have not invoked that logout. After login itself, I have in login itself, I have invoked this home so that it's showing. But if I have called logout and calling that home endpoint, it's not showing, right? So let me show it here once again. So if I am giving only slash, it's showing logged in. And then if I am showing slash home, it's showing current user. And if I show logged out, and then if I call the endpoint home, it will say unauthorized. That is anonymous, right? In home, right? So this is how it is executing. So if I have invoked a logged out before this home endpoint, automatically it specifies unauthorized. So that is the case for there also. So that only it's representing it, right? I think we made it clear. Is any other doubt in this?
Ma'am, can we use pass input to logout user function? I mean, in
Can you repeat the
login,
question?
we queried the user. In
So why I
login,
have deleted?
we used no
See,
no
can you?
while we were logging, ma'am, we are passing argument to login user, and while we are doing logout, we are not passing any argument. It's something to do with the error.
Sonal, can you able to hear the question? I cannot able to hear it.
No, ma'am. His voice is breaking.
Okay. Can you please post it in the chat box? So why I have removed login required here and why I have included here? That is your question. can you post it in the chat box so that it will be better for me to answer the question? Okay, apart from let him post it. Apart from that, any other query regarding this session? So before login, it should not represent as login required. So that only I have removed here. Previously, mistakenly, I have put that login required here. So if I have, once I have removed it, automatically it's showing there. Because before login itself, I'm checking whether login's credentials are correct or not, right? So that login required itself, I'm checking. So that only it's showing error. And after removing it, once after logging in, I'm checking for logout. It should be logged in, as well as for to represent the current user, it should be logged in, right? So login required. So that is why it's showing correctly. And similarly, if you have executed this particular endpoint, and then if you execute this, it will show unauthorized. And after login, if you execute this endpoint, it will show authorized. That is the current user.
And can you explain that secret key, what it is used and how is it working?
So this secret key is to, so if you want to create a session for a particular user, obviously the secret key is mandatory. And that secret key, if you are not using, say for example, if I am not using this secret key and stopping it, and if I run the program, obviously you can able to see that the error will occur. It will show that secret key is not set for the session, right? See. So the session is unavailable because no secret key was set. So you have to set the secret key. That secret key should be unique. And for that, I will tell you what are the properties to set that secret key, right? Just give me 1 minute. So this secret key is used to sign the session cookies for protection against cookie data tampering, right? So whatever session we are creating for that, it should create it. So if you are not setting that secret key, the session itself will not be created, right? So the cookies are nothing but it will store whatever information you are doing in that particular web page. For example, if you are going for any popular application, automatically it will ask you to allow the cookies to store the sessions, right? So if you give accept, automatically it will store what are the things you have done in that application until you log in and until you left that particular website, right? So that cookies cannot be created one if you are not setting that secret key, right? So if the cookies is not created, automatically sessions cannot be maintained. For that only we are setting that secret key, and that secret key should be unique, so that only here in that secret key we have represented it as this much length, right? So here I have given secret key like this. This is my secret key IIT. So any secret key you can give XYZ with the combination of letters as well as the numbers, but it should be unique, right? So that is the thing for this session creation. Anything else you want to add it, Sonal, for secret key?
No, ma'am, it's fine.
Any other question? So I will share this program to you in the chat box. If you want, you can go through it. Okay, SQL instead of SQL. I think it's the old message. So this is the link for the program what we have done today. So you can go through the link and you can implement your Flask login. So you can combine this Flask login for your application to create forms based on HTML forms, and you can integrate it, and then you can check whether the authentication is correctly implemented or not. Yes, if any.
Ma'am, how we manage multiple users here?
See, inspect of here, here I have given only one user. You can add any number of user, and you can check that user, and then you can represent it, right? So inspect of filter by name, you can give all the users from the list, and if there is any valid users there in the list, from there you can able to represent, right? So you can create more number of users. And in here in this query, can you able to see the query? This query is to only filter that particular user, and then based on that user, the content is rendered in the browser. Inspect of that, if you select all the IDs or all the names of the user, and if that names are checked against the validation, that is authentication, and if it is authenticated user, it has to display all the information. So here only one user is added for your for this class convenience, and if you want to add more number of users, you can add it, and then you can check there. That you can do it by forking my link. You can do it by yourself, and then you can check it, right? So the query, only the query you have to change.
If U1 is not a valid user, like what will be the return from that login user function?
That is what I have already shown here, unauthorized.
Okay.
Right? So whatever you are typing, it will show unauthorized. That means you are not authorized to see that particular content, right? If it is showing correctly, automatically that represents that you are authorized. So this one shows that it is authorized, and this one shows that unauthorized. That means even though if you have logged in with the correct credentials and logged out from that credentials, and doing any other operation, it will show you are unauthorized, right? So still you should be in an active state. After logging, you are in an active state until you log out. But
Okay.
if you give logout and then you check for that activeness by checking the current user, automatically it will specify unauthorized, because already you have logged out. The credentials are not available, right? So that is why it's specifying. So this is similar for the other users also. If you are not giving, see, if I am giving any other name apart from rows here, because only rows has been added to this particular table. If I am giving any other name, automatically whatever endpoint I am executing, it will show unauthorized, because the query what I am retrieving is null. It is not containing a valid row. So automatically it will show unauthorized for all the endpoints, whatever I am executing.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Any other queries regarding this Flask login?
Hello.
Yes, Kapil.
The current user attribute that we have imported, that gets set automatically, right? When you do login user.
Yes. Yes.
What is that? Is that an object or current user?
Current user.
Yeah, current user dot name 33 line.
Yes. So that specifies that current user is one of the class, right? So here we are representing all, or the login manager is a class, user mixin, we are passing that user mixin as one of the argument, login user, logout user, current user, everything is represented as a class. And we are representing this current user dot name to represent whether the current, it will display the name of that current user, right? So that current user specifies that it is the, uh, if it is an active user, then this current user will return the corresponding name of that user, right? So if it is not an active user, it will just display unauthorized. So if you see here, we have represented login user, logout user, current user, right? So flask login is mainly to represent the login information, logout information, and the current active state user information. So for these three purposes, we have represented this login user, and then logout user and current user. So that current user represents the active user who is available in that particular session. So if that's active user session is if the user session is active, it will return the current username.
Okay.
Ma'am, at login required is the one which confirms whether the active user is there or not.
Yes, correct. See, why I have removed this login required from before login itself, you should not check for login credentials. So that from this particular line, I have removed it. And for logout, only if he has logged in, he can able to log out. So that here as well as here, the login credentials are checked. If that login credentials are correct, then only it can able to retrieve that current user information. Otherwise, it will represent as an unauthorized user, right?
Okay.
So that is the mistake I have done while I am typing the program. So that only, so Kapil has correctly pointed out that mistake. So once I have removed that login required, because before login itself, I cannot check whether the credentials are correct for the current user, because the user has not at all logged in. So that if I, after removing it, it's working fine. And that is represented for logout as well as for checking the current user. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, any other questions? Sonal, if there is no other questions, let's wind up the session, or anything else you want to discuss?
Oh, ma'am, we can wait for some time.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else who have joined lately, if you have any doubts, you can ask me.
Hello.
Yes.
If we have multiple users in our database table, can we specifically extract one particular user if we can pass?
Yes, you can specifically you can retrieve it. So that is so here also the query is based on a particular user, that is rows, right? So so that I can show it now. Okay, just give me 1 minute. Okay, I'm sharing it. I'm adding one more user. And then I'm adding that user also to the session. Okay, and then the session has been committed, right? If you run this and if you check for that current user, since the query is retrieving by the name rows, it will just display rows, right? So let me show you. Logged in and I'm checking for the current user, right? So can you able to see here? It's showing only rows because the query is specific to retrieve only one user from that, right? So based on the query, how you are writing, you can either display all the users or you can display what are the user who have logged in using the specific query, right? So here two users are there and two users are added to the table user, and even though two users have been added, still it's showing the current user because the query has been written like that, right? So user dot query filter, and it has to be filtered by the name rows, and that first also represent if you have any other name representing rows in any other call rows, automatically it will retrieve only the first one, right?
Okay. So what is the function of that first user I function? First user, line 17.
This one,
Line number
this
17.
17, line number 17, first user. So this will load the ID of that particular user, right? So already I have specified that get ID, that is uh, implicitly implemented by user mixin, right? So that you get ID will be loaded by this function, right? So first it has to load the user, right? First, once the user has, after the user has been loaded into the how to say, so once the into the current active state, then only you can check the endpoint that whether the user is what is the by querying that content you can represent whether he has logged in or logged out, or what is the status of the current user, right? So this particular thing is to load it. First we are loading the user by specifying, so already have user mixing 4 properties I have represented. So the last property is the get id property, where a unique id will be represented for each and every user of that particular login. So that particular unique ID will be retrieved, right? So based on this endpoint, first it will execute this endpoint and it will filter that. By filtering that, it will load the corresponding ID of that user, and that ID will be represented until the session has been completed for that particular user. right? So that ID will be displayed. Sorry, that ID will be returned, and that will be used for the entire session.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, if you have any other doubts, you can ask me so that I will. So is there any other doubt in chat box? No.
Can you please explain that once again, that user loaded? Where are we using first user function? Where are we calling it?
Wait, this one.
Same login manager, that dot user loader, right?
See, once the decorator function itself represent that, if you're calling that decorator, automatically it will be executed. No need to call it. Similar to the endpoints. For example, if you are executing this endpoint, this method will be automatically invoked. Is that correct or not? Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Similar to that, if you are invoking this decorator user loader, this will load the corresponding unique session ID of that user.
Okay, so when were we calling that like that decorator?
Here only, here.
No, like how it is getting invoked. What is it the login required, or how is it getting?
So here we are not specifying any endpoint representation like route, right? So this specifies that's similar to this. Here we are representing login required, but you have not called it. But how it is invoking, since you have represented like this, after this endpoint, this has to be invoked automatically. And this login required will check the credentials, and then it will invoke this particular method, right? So similar to this, first itself it will invoke and it will get the ID of that corresponding user. That ID is represented as the unique string ID of that corresponding user. That will be retrieved, and based on that string ID only the remaining part will be get executed. Right, similar to this it will execute. So how we are
but we are
not
passing ID here, right? So how is it getting that ID?
So this particular int of ID, right?
Yeah,
So this is
first user of ID we are passing. So from where it is getting that ID?
So this ID will be retrieved from here.
Okay. So login user will automatically invoke that login manager user loader.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this? I think if you have any other question, kindly post it in the chat box, or kindly unmute yourself and ask the question. Because your project, if you are doing a project related to this course, automatically you should have maintained the session for that login. So this will be very useful for you. So instead of creating in a single file, there you will have HTML forms. From that forms, you can link with this particular Flask login, and then check the corresponding text box against if he is a valid user or not. And if he is a valid user, you can navigate that corresponding user to the next page. Like that, you can give, right? So for any application, whatever you are implementing in your MAD1 course, automatically it requires login, right? So that login can be implemented using this small initiation. So if you go through this, automatically you can able to understand how to do that login, log in, log out, and to check the current user, everything you can represent, and how the session is managed.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, in case of username and password, if we are using username and password, then
Okay.
we should call the student on the basis of username and password or its student ID.
Username and password. So here we have it has been given as ID, but you have to represent the user. For example, if you are in this column, only the ID and name. In this table, only the ID and name has been set. You can set username and password for that, and you can check against whether the username and password that is stored in the table, whether it is matching with that current user. And if it is matching, you can ask that user to log in. Otherwise, you can put
So
a
error
message
page.
that yes, unauthorized.
Okay,
Here
ma'am.
only ID and name has been used, so that that ID is used here. But you can represent the username and password here, and you can check against it. If the username and password is correct, it has to log in.
Okay, ma'am. And can we store password as it is for our project?
Hashable password, right? So you want to represent that password as hashed. If you're
Oh,
representing as a hashed one, automatically it will not show the password. It will be in an encrypted form. That is what you are asking, right?
yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, you can hash it and then you can store it. If you are storing it directly, then it will be represented directly in the database. Otherwise, if you are hashing it, automatically it will be represented as some encrypted strings, and it will be stored. And while you are retrieving, it will decrypt it, and then you can check against with the original password.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And ma'am, one more question can I ask
Yeah,
about
yeah, sure,
week
sure, sure,
assignment
sure.
7?
Yeah, what?
It
Repeat it.
is about assignment that we submitted, assignment for week 7.
Okay,
Ma'am, I do not use API there, but
okay.
my app was working perfectly. So, but it was showing 302 as I was using redirect URL for.
So whether in the question statement they have specified API is mandatory?
No, ma'am, but they want status code as 200. And while the uh, redirect URL for was returning status code as 302. So my
So,
many of the test cases are wrong even after my app is working perfectly without using API.
okay. Okay, just wait for a minute. Sonal, can you please answer for this question regarding assignment?
Ma'am, 302 is a valid response. It is executed when there is post request while we update or submit the form data or create something.
Okay, but he is asking for it should return 200, right?
No, ma'am. I got it that it will surely return 302, but I want to know if I want to get status code as 200, then API is the necessary thing, or we can
Okay,
get the status code as 200 without using API.
okay. So you can formulate the query and post it in the discourse. So this will be answered. And I think Satyam is raising the hand. Yes, tell me, Satyam.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is related to week 8 practice assignment. So,
Okay.
ma'am, in that question, can I ask that question to Sonal, ma'am? Because I have been
Yeah, yeah.
interacting with her.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Sonal, are you there? I think. Okay, you just ask the question. If I am able to solve it, I will tell you. Otherwise, I will tell you to post it in the discourse.
Okay.
You just ask the question.
Okay. Ma'am, in week 8 practice assignment question.
Okay, just give me 1 minute. I will open that week 8 practice 3 question, right?
Yes, ma'am. Week
Yes,
8,
just
week 8
I
practice.
will open it. Just give me 1 minute, okay? I will open it from my side. Okay.
Ma'am, first question it is.
Okay, you are presenting. Wait, I will open it. Just give me 1 minute. Just now only it's loading. Just give me 1 minute. BK question number 1.
Practice assignment.
Practice assignment, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the question is a server has 16 core CPU, 64 GB RAM, and 1 Gbps network connection. It can run a Python Flask application that can. So, okay, I will present this. Can you able to see my screen? No, right?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Okay, yeah. Just I will stop here and then I will present that particular window. Okay, this is the question, right? Your server
Yes,
has
ma'am.
16 core CPU, 64 GB RAM, and 1 Gbps network connection. It can run a Python Flask application that can generate 500 HTML pages per second. Each page has 1 MB image that needs to be downloaded by the client. So what will be the maximum number of requests per second? that the server can handle, right? So the question, what will be the maximum number of requests per second, that itself specifies that it is depending on this depending on the bandwidth, right? So nothing else, that network bandwidth, right? So
Yes,
no
ma'am.
need to worry about the CPU, RAM and all. Only this you should consider, right? So
Yes, ma'am. But in this question, I know its answer will be 125 if we are
okay,
considering only bandwidth. But
okay,
ma'am, my doubt is it is also stating that SaaS application that can generate 500 HTML pages per second. So
okay.
in that case, ma'am, 125 is under 500, so it's not a problem. But ma'am, I wanted to ask that what would happen if we will increase our bandwidth by five numbers? Like what would happen if our bandwidth is 6 Gbps per second? So ma'am, I wanted to ask what will be the answer then?
So if it is for 6 Gbps, what will be the uh,
Yes, ma'am. Number of requests that can server can handle.
okay, so that is your question. So okay, we will
Yes.
solve this. Okay, just give me 1 minute. I will solve this and then show it to you.
Yes.
I will present that paint now. Okay, can you please unmute until
Yes,
I
ma'am.
will do. Okay, so just can open the paint. So here, 500 pages. Can you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, 500 pages, and the previous question is 1 MB request, and then so it is equal to 8 megabits. So we are representing 4,008 into 500, 4,000. So automatically 1 Gbps it is represented as 1,000. So we are representing 125, right? So here you are representing as 6 Gbps, right? Are you there?
Ma'am.
Right, so 500 pages is represented. So here 1 MB is represented 1 megabits, sorry, 8 megabits, right? Because byte is represented as bits. 1 byte is equivalent to 8 bits. So we are representing like this. So 8 into 500 equal to 4000. So 4000, and then there are 500 pages which is to be accessed with 1 Gbps. So automatically 50, sorry, 500 plus 1000, right? So this much divided by 4000 will give 125. This is the answer for the first question, right? Is that right? Clear? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. But it's 1 Gbps. So if we convert it into bits, sorry, ma'am, it's in bits. So if we convert it into bytes, we would divide it by 8. So by dividing 1000 by 8, we would get 125.
Yeah, 125.
Yes, ma'am.
Now,
So if we increase this to 6000 and now we
okay.
divide it by 8, we will get,
Okay.
ma'am, 750.
Okay,
So
750. It should not be 750. It should be reduced from this. No, no, no. The request should be greater, right? So 750 is the request, right?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. What is any other doubt? So automatically you have itself given the answer. Then why are you asking me, right? So,
No, ma'am. My doubt was in that
yeah.
question.
Okay.
Can you switch your screen to question? It is
Yeah, yeah.
stating
Okay.
that the Flask application can generate 500 HTML pages per second.
Okay.
So, ma'am, it is restricting to 500 HTML pages, but from that we would get 750. So, what would be the answer? It would be
See,
750 or
request.
500.
No, no, no. See, you are confusing between the number of pages and then number of requests, right? So I will present the question once again. Just give me 1 minute. Right? So here it can generate 500 HTML pages per second. That means, but the question is how maximum number of requests, right? So that is different from the 500 HTML pages that is generating by that Flask application, right? So that is different. Request is different. So request increases to 750 request if it is of the network connection is of 6 Gbps, because the bandwidth has increased, so the number of requests has increased. But the application which is generating 500 HTML pages is based on the application. It's nowhere you are going to depend with the bandwidth, right? So bandwidth is depending on the number of requests that are sent to that server.
Okay.
Okay.
But, ma'am,
yeah.
so, ma'am, what they are trying to say by specifying this, that Flask application that can generate 500 HTML pages per second?
So that say actually, see, this also making you to make a just make you to confuse, right? So similar to that only they have also given this, but the original thing is this is what you are representing, and this is the thing, how much the size of the images and what is the bandwidth is and how many requests you have to generate, right? So that is the main categories of things you have to represent. Remaining things and all, it's just to make you to get confused, right? So if you are, so now you are saying that it is 6 Gbps, automatically it will increase the bandwidth, but that is nowhere dependent on the Flask application, which is generating number of pages. So for example, if you are running an application with more number of HTML pages as well as Python pages, uh, accessing one page will navigate to another page, another page, another page. You cannot able to access all the pages at the same time. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Then that means why you're getting confused by this, right? So even though you are going to, it is going to generate this much number of pages, you are going to send a request to a particular page. That page can be navigated to remaining 499 pages. That is not your issue, right? So you are going to give a request. Based on the request and based on the input you are giving, it will be navigated to the next page. But the request is same. It is not going to differ for the 500 HTML pages. For each page, you are not going to give individual request. From one request, it will going to navigate from page to page. That's it, right?
But ma'am,
Yeah,
I
tell me.
thought that they are trying to say that it can serve 500 HTML pages.
Okay.
Or if we say that for one request it serves one HTML page, so it
Okay.
can serve 500 HTML pages per second. So if we go by bandwidth, it would be 750, but it can only serve 500 pages. So I thought the answer would be 500. That's
No, no, no. 750 is the, if it is increased, it will be increased to 750. That is the request, right?
yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions regarding that? Kapil, thank you, ma'am. Nice session. Thank you, Kapil. Yes, if you have any other questions, kindly ask me now. Otherwise, we can wind up the session. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I think there is no other question. So, okay, thank you all for joining this session. And if you have any doubts, kindly post it in the discourse. And with this, we can wind up the session. Thank you. So the solution link has been posted there. So based on that solution, you can represent that for 6 GBVS also, right? So in discourse, Abhishek sir has also specified that. So here, there they have represent 10 power 9 divided by 8 into 10 power 6, which is 10 power 9 is gigabits and 10 power 6 is megabits, right? So here, if you are saying of 6 GBps, automatically 6 into 10 power 9 divided by 8 into 10 power 6, right? So if you want, you can verify that link also.